when we want to save something, when we want to save any information, what is the technology that we normally use to save some information? Okay, we need to save some information, we need to read it back. What are the ways that you can do? What are the ways that we normally take into action in order to achieve something? What are the normal things that you guys use? Just leave it in the chat or just tell me via voice how you gonna save data. Okay. Yes. Anyone? Normally, how you gonna save information? Like, say for example, I want to save some information regarding my personal information. Sometimes applications want to share some details. What are the ways that you can do? Yes. Supani, Mayura, Lakshan, what are the methods of persisting data? How you gonna save some data and get those things back? Sorry.
In phone and laptop.
Yeah, anywhere in an application, maybe you are developing a web application, maybe you're developing a desktop application. How you gonna persist data and get those things back? Yes. Anyone? Rashmika, Ashani, what sort of mechanism that you use to store data and get it back? So normally, when we want to, yeah. So there are a couple of things coming on, local storage, cookies, database, text files. Yes, store on database, text files, databases, database or text files. Yes. So normally when we want to save some information, the most common thing that comes to our mind is database, of course. So databases are, there are like a lot of databases types going on in recent years, but earlier on, like if I take like 10 or 15 years ago, if somebody asked me what sort of database that you're going to be using, we're going to say, yeah, we'll be storing information using databases like MySQL, Postgres, MSSQL, this kind of thing. So those all are coming to a category called SQL databases or SQL databases. So the majority of our applications right now running, okay, basically they'll be using SQL databases. But recent years, amid of the large information gathering that we are doing, a lot of time SQL databases does not fulfill all our needs. So in that scenario, what we're going to do is we will be using some other technologies, such as sometimes we want to store information in file formats. Okay, say for example, if you want to store a huge uh, line of text, okay, rather than putting everything in a database, we might put it in a file and we store that file in our hard disk or somewhere safe, and we can retrieve the content afterwards if you want to read. In such a ways, we can we can have most of the time, depending on the data type, we'll probably gonna go with storage or database storage. Either way, that works. Okay, but most of the time when we want to have large amount of information that we need to query out. So say for example, we have 1,000 users within our system, and we want to particularly select one user, which is identified by unique ID or email, something like that. Then the easiest form of storing this information and retrieving this information is going to be using a database. So we'll be using SQL databases, and there are like NoSQL databases. If you haven't living under a rock, there are NoSQL databases out there as well, such as MongoDB, Redis, Cassandra, and you name it. There are a lot of NoSQL databases which does not follow the SQL rules, like tables and relationship. We do not have this such a kind of things. They are catering something different than what we are trying to cater from a SQL database. Okay, if you take if you take for instance something like MongoDB, the database is very flexible in schema. So we do not have defined set of columns and everything. We can put most of the time data in more unstructured ways. Then when we want to get back those data, we need to make sure we have getting everything back. So there are a lot of NoSQL database in Rise, but most of the time when we are working with mobile phones or mobile applications, we'll be using most of the time we'll be using SQL databases, especially within our applications that we'll be developing using Kotlin or something like that. We'll be using um, a special database called SQLite. Okay, SQLite. So that is like a default database that comes within your phone. Okay, it's a file-based database. So even though it is acting as a database, it's like a file, basically structured in a way that we can access information in much faster way than we are accessing a normal file. So if you look at the information, if you look at these things, SQLite is almost available in both Android and iOS and other operating system, as far as I know. And remember, it is not the only database there is. So there are like NoSQL database in action as well. There are plenty of other there are plenty of other databases that is available right now. You can even use those things, but as fundamentals, as we are trying to getting started everything, we'll be using normal SQL databases in this scenario. Especially in this instance, we'll be using something SQLite. Okay, so if you guys know any SQL, because you guys know there are a language called SQL, structured query language. So we need to know structured query language or SQL in order to insert data, in order to retrieve, update, delete, or whatever the operations that we're gonna do. We need to know those SQL language. Okay, for example, if I want to select certain columns from a certain database, there's a structure. Okay, yeah, I have to say select and the column names, and I have to use the from keyword, then the table. And if I have like conditions, say for instance, I want to have a condition like giving a where clue, like select only the people who have the age greater than 35, that's kind of thing. Okay, you guys know that we have write and SQL code. Okay, so these SQL queries that we are running and which we are writing, yes, that is okay to get started. Everybody should know SQL in some point to get started. Most of the time, during some interviews, you might be asked on certain SQL queries, certain operations such as joins and all those things. So You have to know SQL at least at least to some extent. But recently, when we are working with languages like Kotlin, Java, we come across things like objects. Okay, so we have objects, we have interfaces, that kind of thing. So we normally live or see the code in a way like objects and classes and everything like that. So if you take the database structure, it is a completely different thing. The completely different in the sense we don't have objects in SQL. Okay, at least from SQL database perspective, we don't have things like objects. We have things like rows. Okay, so um, an object represent an instance of a class. Okay, so we have a class. Let's say, for example, we have a class called person, and that person class have two fields, first name and last name, and an instance or an object of it. That means we create a new object using that person class. So say, for example, we will give first name as Randika, last name as Hapugoda. So the single instance, the single object that we have created is an instance of that class. Okay, we have a class. Out of that class, we create one object. So in terms of database, we don't have such a thing. We don't have like objects, or we don't have things like instance. But something similar is there if you have a close look at the relationship between those two. For to storing this information, if I want to store this first name and last name in a database, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a table. I'm going to create a table called, probably I will use the same as the class name. So I'll create a table called users. Sure. So I'll create a table called users, and I will have um, two columns. Okay, first name and the last name. So it is somewhat identical or somewhat similar to what the concept of classes are having. So we have a class and we have table. We have fields in classes and we have columns in table. Okay, so if I want to if I want to create an instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have create a instance of that class and assign those values. Same way, within the table, if I insert a single row, that means I will insert first name and last name, two columns. If I fill it out, same thing. So you guys can see I have like a mapping sort of thing going on with the application and the database. So this kind of thing, this kind of mapping, okay, it is quite common these days. We use that kind of mapping. So in object-oriented world, we have things like object, classes, fields. In database world, we have things like tables and columns and rows. Okay, so we can make the bridge, we can make the connection between those two without doing much of the work. Okay, so in order to make that bridge, the object-oriented world and the database, we have invented tools called ORMs, or object relational mappings. Okay, so these ORM tools, what they do is they reduce the bridge, or they reduce the gap between the object world and the database world. So if I want to communicate with the database, I do not want to know most of the time the SQL syntaxes or something like that. But as I mentioned, it is not like completely gone. I have a basic idea of that. All the mappings that should happen when I execute that field, execute a query, how do we do the mappings and everything. Basically, we can leave those tasks or those things to an ORM. So we are planning, we are talking in terms of objects and we are talking in objects, object list, single objects, that kind of way. But on the background, what they do is they will make the connection between the database, and it will try to retrieve those information for us. Okay, you will see what I'm talking when we are going into these examples and everything. So the bridge between the object-oriented world and the database can be merged using something we'll be using ORM tools, or object relational mappings. So object relational mappings happens in different forms. So object-oriented ORM tools are not only limited to web applications or mobile applications. Okay, the both worlds can utilize this. Even if any other sort of application like desktop applications, you can use the ORM mapping of your choice. But the most popular one for Android world is an ORM tool called Room, ROMM, Room. So Room is one of the most popular ORM tools available for Android. So most of the examples that you will see most of the time when you're working with a real project, you will be surprised to find Room in majority of the time. Okay, there are the tools, yes, but recently Room gains the popularity and upper hand. So other ORM tools exist, but not popular as Room. So we'll be utilizing Room to communicate with our database with as our ORM tool. We'll see how we can improve upon that. And as I mentioned earlier, ORM tools are not limited for mobile application, but the thing is, Room is ORM tool called Room is especially have good connection between Android applications. Okay, so you probably haven't seen anyone using Room outside of Android ecosystem, but it doesn't mean that there are no other tools, ORM tools out there for the platforms. So for example, if you're using a framework to create web applications such as Java and Spring Boot, the most popular ORM tool that you will come across is something called Hibernate. Okay, you have Hibernate to make a connection between your Java application. Maybe most of the time it's going to be like something like Spring Boot, and you have a database connection which will communicate with each other. So the most common one that we will see is what we call Hibernate. Okay, that is like the most popular ORM tool available for Java web applications or desktop applications. You can use that. But that is in the Java or Kotlin world. But if you take around other frameworks such as Node.js or Python Django, as a web framework, they have their own ORM tools which you can use. If you take Node world, there are a lot of ORM tools out there. I heavily use most of the time Type ORM. That is most popular one in Node.js, as well as there are a lot of other ORM tools available, MicroORM, and there are like Prism. A lot of tools are available. So the bottom line is any OP language that you'll be using, you will be having some kind of support for ORM tools at some given time. And remember, ORM is not like the holy grail of everything. It has its advantages as well as disadvantages. So, so it is like, as I mentioned, it's going to be like, what do you call, a connector between the database and the application. So it might include a performance lag sometimes within our application. Okay, so that is something expectable. But comparing to it to the complexity of ourselves, we are handling all the queries and everything. I personally believe that it's like simple sacrifice that we can make in terms of saving a lot of time. Okay, so we'll be using Room in this scenario. So first thing first that we need to do is we need to get a Room instantiated in our application. Okay. So you will be using basic basic application in order to set up these things, and we will see how we can get it done. So in order to follow along, I'll be using the um, Android official guide for Room, which I'll post in the chat. So if you guys following along, you guys can see this example as well. But I'm gonna go through this section and try to explain each and every layer. Okay, so you guys can take a leverage on this one if you want to follow along later on. Okay, all right. Let me see. Okay. I think I don't need my face to be shown. All right, so we'll be simply creating an inventory system using Room, and it's gonna be like really simple that we'll be having some item put into our database. So we'll have a few fields, okay, like the name, price, and stock, that's kind of thing. And we will just save it in the application, save it in the Room database, and we will try to retrieve those information back from the database. So we'll insert few things and we'll try to retrieve those things. So that is like the basic idea behind it. So we'll see how we can do that and how we can get started. Okay, so first thing that we need to do is we need to instantiate the Room. Okay, we need to get Room installed within our application. That is something that we need to get done first. So as you guys can remember, when we had our what do you call the retrofit application, first thing that we did we get the dependencies in checked. Okay, so if we have the dependencies in checked, then what we're gonna do is um, work on those things later on. Okay, so we'll first we'll get the Room instantiated. So let me get the dependencies first. First of all, we need to find the Gradle script. I'm not sure that you guys can see clearly, but I hope it will make more sense. So I'm working at the buyer project. So I'm gonna start look into the buyer module, and you guys can see I have plenty of other dependencies in here. So we have glide, we have retrofit. The next thing that I'm gonna add to this list is Room. Okay, ORM. Okay, so everyone knows that's the ORM that we're gonna be using. So what we need is something like this. Okay, so we need the Android Room runtime version, Android X Room compiler, and we need KTX. So these are like the things that we need. So in here, they have used the Room version in a separate file, but I'm not gonna use that. Instead of that, I'm gonna use the Room version that I can find on internet. Let me get the latest version of Room. So Room available at this point is 2.6.1. So I'm gonna hard code the values in here, so I don't have to, refer or define it in any other place. But feel free, if you want to make it outside, you can have it in a way like that. But it's not mandatory to have it in a root project. So the next thing that we need is to resolve this KSP. Let me do a quick search. KSP. Right. Kotlin symbol processing. That's the thing that we are using. Let me see how we can use K to KSP. I think I need to define this. Give me a second. KSP. Right. So I need to define KSP. Give me a second, guys. So KSP is like the annotation processor. I'm not quite familiar with this one, so let me get setting it up really quickly. It should come. Okay. Build. Okay. So in order to work with KSP, what I need to do is I need to add it as a plugin like this. So what it's gonna basically do is it's gonna instantiate this KSP plugin for us. So KSP is gonna help us uh, with the annotation processing that we will be doing later on. Right now, just let it be like that. Okay, we'll see how we can make it work later on. Let me check what I have missed. Espresso. Okay, I think that is done. So I might sync the project. So in order to get these things up and running, you guys can see on the bottom that it's doing its job, getting all the plugins and everything that we need in order to work. Okay, so let's give it some time since it's in progress. If an error comes in, we will jump in and see how we can resolve that. Okay, next thing, what we need to do till everything is going on. Next thing that we need to do is we will focus on some of the uh, terms that we'll be using within our application. So these things are like pretty much common to more or all of pretty much common to most of the ORMs that is out there. But these are like common components for any ORM that I have seen so far. So we need to know about these terminologies when we are talking about ORMs or in general room. Okay. So first thing that we need to know when we are talking about room is something what we call entities. Okay. So entities is just like plain old classes that we have, but they represent something special. That means the entity is uh, something like a representation of the table in our database. So uh, entity is like we can think in our application, we have tables. So entity represent something like a table in our database, but in our object-oriented space. Okay, so think those entities are the binding, the glue that bind the tables and the information with related to that with the object-oriented world and database world. So entity is like the direct comparison or direct access point for our tables within our application. Okay, so that is one thing that we need to do is the declaration of entities. Okay, the next thing that we need to do, next thing that we need to know in our application is knowing DAOs. DAO, DAO. Okay, so DAO is short term or uh, short abbreviation for data access object. Okay, so data access object. So data access object is somewhat something that we can call is like the operations that we need to do within our um, application. So for instance, using a DAO, we can insert a document, we can update a document, we can delete a document, we can retrieve a document. So the DAO is like directly, we can think like when we are executing our SQL queries, that is the DAO's responsibility to do such thing. Okay, so entities represent table, DAO represent the operations that we're going to do, like updating, inserting, and everything. Okay, so then we have something called database classes. Okay, so the database classes, they provide us the instance of the DAO associated with the database. So don't get confused with the entities and the database classes. So they perform two different things. Okay, database classes is like um, uh, the output we can think about in terms of DAOs. So we use DAOs to retrieve applications. The database class does the mapping or the association with them. So we'll see these things in action. How we gonna define entities, how we gonna define the DAOs, how we gonna define databases classes. So if you guys know SQL, yeah, the first thing that you guys need to know that um, uh, the first thing that you guys need to know that we need to create the databases, right? We need to create the database structures and everything. So we use create database and what are the fields, what are the IDs and everything that we need to do such things. So in Room, when we define those entities, when we are defining the entities, it automatically creates those tables and everything for us. So we don't have to worry about creating those tables and everything. And we have things like migrations. So you guys know that a database is not gonna remain same, remain still throughout our application. Through sometimes when our application grows, um, it changes throughout the time. For example, we might add a new field, we might remove a field, we might run some updates. So the database changes time to time. So when that things are happening, we need to make sure our database data remains stable. Okay, we do not lose any of our data, but we will be having a migration script that will convert the old database data into the new version of our database. So we will see these things in action, database migration as well. So right now we will be using simply integration. First, we will try to get some data inside our database and we'll try to retrieve these things. Okay, so we have things like room, data access objects, we have entities, and we have the application structure that we have done. Okay, so remember these concept, because these concepts comes more than you think within our application. All right, so first we need to think about an entity that we'll be creating. Okay, so what are the how we're going to create an entity, and what are the things that it's going to hold? Okay, so what we're going to do is I will go to the by application. Let me see if I can zoom in. Unfortunately, this area is not zoomed.